everyone, and welcome to Central Library. My name is Wendy Westgate, and I'm part of Los Angeles Public Library's LA Made team. LA Made is a series of cultural programs funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And in our fourth season, we have 165 educational and entertaining programs for you to choose from, taking place both here at the Taper and at branches across the system. I also want to thank the following companies that donated their time and equipment that allowed us to do this awesome program. Bedrock LA, Spitfire Audio, Future Lighting, Dub Lab, Ace Hotel, and Meyer Sound, which provided the quadraphonic sound reinforcement for this event. Can we have a round of applause for these generous donors? Suzanne Ciani is a 5-time Grammy Award nominated composer, electronic music pioneer, and neoclassical recording artist whose work has been featured in countless commercials, video games, and feature films. She provided the voice and sounds for Bally's groundbreaking Xenon pinball machine, created Coca-Cola's Pop and Pour sound, designed Atari's sound logo, played concerts all over the globe, and carved out a niche as one of the most creatively successful female composers in the world. We are thrilled to welcome her to the LA Made stage today, so please give a warm welcome to Ms. Suzanne Ciani.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. That was amazing. That was incredible.
It's most fun for me. I always thought, that jazz is more fun to do than to listen to. So, I know I had a good time.
Is this jazz? If this is jazz, I'm all about it.
Well, it's in the moment. You don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, but you don't know.
So that was all improvised.
It's improvised, but, there's a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But you're free in the moment to decide what to do.
Do you only ever play in quadraphonic sound now?
I've only always played in quadraphonic when I played the Buchla right from the beginning, right from the 60s.
So was it easier or more mainstream to play in quad in those days, or was it challenging to get theaters and audiences to set up for it?
Well, I led a sheltered life. I grew up in kind of Buchla's studio, and it was quad. And I came out into the world and found out that quad wasn't okay. So
Quad's okay.
Yeah.
Quad's okay.
But, my first confrontation, I went to New York after LA, and I actually found an agent who was going to represent me to play the Buchla. This was absurd. And he got me a concert in Lincoln Center at Avery Fisher Hall. And I went in, as a pre-production, and I said, and I'll need the, a speaker back there and a speaker back there. And they said, what? We can't do that. We don't do that. That's not, we can't do that. I said, well, then I can't play. And so I never did the concert. And I started a nonprofit corporation ambitiously to try to get the theater redesigned because they were
A woman of principle. I like
yeah,
it.
yeah. So, but that didn't happen.
So, what opportunities do you find that playing and composing in quadraphonic presents for you as a composer?
It's, this instrument that Don Buchla designed is a performance instrument. It's an electronic analog modular. We never used the word synthesizer because that was kind of loaded. It had implications that were not appropriate. And Don was a very stubborn guy, and you don't meet this kind of person often, maybe never. So he had his principles and he held to them, and one of them was quadraphonic. And it's because electronic music is essentially a monophonic signal. The oscillator puts out a tone, and that tone travels through certain paths, filters and envelopes or whatever, and comes out, as a single sound. And in order to bring it to life, you want it to move, and the movement is organic to the sound because it's voltage-controlled movement. So it can dance in the space, and that brings it to life.
How would you, is that what you would characterize as what your initial attraction was to this instrument? The fact that it could move in this way?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. That was just part of it. That was part of the instrument. It was a given. I didn't even think of it as anything different than what should be there, You
have you have a more traditional kind of composition background. You studied composition outside before you encountered this instrument. So, when you came across the Buchla for the first time, what did it represent for you in terms of new freedoms or possibilities that it opened up?
Well, that's exactly the word, freedom. Because I was a traditional composer, getting my master's degree in music composition at the University of California at Berkeley. And honest to God, it's not even a secret. If you were a woman in those days, it was bleak. It was so part of the fabric of our culture that women were not allowed to have any position of, command. I took a conducting class, and I was told women have no right on the podium. I wrote for my composition class, I like to write small, short pieces. I don't know why, I just did. And I was told, well, women don't know how to write major pieces. And all of this was just woven into the experience of, your coming of age in a world that you wanted to give you openings. So you saw that there were no openings. And when electronic music, when I saw this instrument, I intuitively knew that I could be independent.
So you're saying the synthesizer is inherently a feminist instrument?
It is. It is. And in fact, if you look at the history of electronic music, you will find, and I know you because you wrote a book on all kinds of things, but, Delia Derbyshire, Daphne Oram. They started the radiophonic workshop. And last year I played at Royal Albert Hall in a program of women pioneers. And for the first time, they played a piece that Daphne Oram wrote in 1943.
Wow.
And it was brilliant. I'm sorry, I'm not competitive and I'm not comparing, but no man has done.
I'm with that. No, it's funny. I was going to ask you basically the same question because, I write about tech history, and one thing that I have found in my study of this is that if you're looking for women in tech history, you tend to it's easier to look at the beginnings of things because that's where women often come in before there's a canon, before there's an institution, before there's a precedent. The first computer programmers were women, and they were doing it because it was a job that was not taken seriously.
It was like knitting.
Yeah, and it didn't have any established place in society. I don't know as much about electronic music history, but I had the intuition it was kind of the same deal. So that stacks up for you.
Yeah, I mean, they did it because it was an independent thing. It wasn't teamwork. It wasn't the boys' network. It wasn't, women worked alone. They didn't have, a collective consciousness at that time. We're just starting to get it now.
Yeah, there's a sense of an all-in-one instrument here, where you're not beholden to someone else's conception of what it is you're able or supposed to do. You don't have to rely on anybody else to perform. You're really just able to do exactly what you want to do, if what you want to do is make electronic music.
Right.
Okay, moving on. I want to talk a little bit about your early life with the Buchla, 'cause I saw you play at Moogfest a couple of years ago, and the one thing I really took away from the after-show Q&A, not unlike this one, that you did, was you talked about how you had, for a long time, kind of lived with the Buchla, like almost like it was a pet or something, and that you would sort of put sounds on in the house and just leave them on all day. And I really like this idea of living with a piece of technology. I want to talk about like what happens when you open up your space to that kind of intimacy with a machine.
Well, this machine is kind of alive. I mean, Dawn designed it to be responsive and to give feedback. Mm-hmm. So it has little lights that tell you what's going on, and it's very communicative. It's not just I look at some of they're changing now, but a lot of the Eurorack systems that started to come out in this new era, this new renaissance of interest in analog music, they had no life force in them to see. And I miss that. So, yeah, this instrument can be on. It is on all the time. Why would you shut it off? I mean, why?
It's a beautiful thing. I mean, we all have like a real sort of physical and emotional intimacy with our machines, but our machines today are so opaque and ungiving, Whereas this is something that's so tactile that I feel like it automatically creates this kind of embodied connection that is really, really deep. I mean, I can see that when you play. I mean, this complicated thing with great intimacy. It's a beautiful thing to see.
And there are sections of that piece I did that could have gone on forever because, the machine knows how to play itself as well. Because of all the feedback loops with the control voltages, you can set up something that's really an installation that's ever-changing but evolving.
Do you ever do durational performances that are really long?
Oh, yeah.
What's the longest you've ever gone?
Well, I had an installation in Berkeley that was there for a couple of weeks, and it was just on for a couple of weeks. But in those days, honestly, nobody knew where the sound was coming from. Anyway.
They thought there was like a little man inside
right.
pedaling. Well, times really have changed. This kind of leads me to my next question, which is that, you've been doing this for so long that you've seen these massive technological and generational shifts happen. And here we are in 2019, and there's still there is this passionate audience for this kind of old school analog synthesis. And does it feel like things have come full circle for you? I mean, is it déjà vu or is it a new thing?
It's very déjà vu. And it's magical for me because in the old days, I dreamed of this. I was doing just what I just did, although it was a different machine. So I was playing the 200. This is the 200E. And unless you're really into it, I wouldn't bother to explain the differences. But
I think some people might be really into it.
Right.
But maybe that's Q&A time.
Yeah. But there was such a gap between myself and the audience that and I thought it would close quickly. I really thought it was around the corner, but this is the consciousness that's been around this type of music for a long time, that it was just going to be every place. And, it started with the theremin. It didn't start with the theremin, but the theremin was an episode that was quite fascinating.
Also an instrument that was really most masterfully played by a woman, Clara Rockmore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This makes you think. But I think it's interesting because, I feel like probably initially people's attraction to this instrument, as audiences would be like how newfangled and futuristic it was. I try to imagine what it would be like to hear a sound like that for the very first time. Whereas today, we've lived with it long enough that maybe some of the attraction becomes about nostalgia and like the old school quality of it. So it's this weird timelessness outside of time,
My mission right now actually is to show, I think if you wanted to get philosophical,
Yeah, I do.
okay, well, when things come into being, when they first crystallize, there's an energy in that manifestation that is very powerful. The music around the piano, when the piano came out, the violin, when the instrument finally crystallized, there was this surge of amazing, repertoire technique. And that's what I think happened in this instrument, that in those days when it really had the force of beginning, there was an energy that now we need to reinvestigate, because, and I needed to reinvestigate it too. When I came back to the instrument, I had forgotten the techniques that I had in the 60s and 70s. And I went back to them, thanks to a paper that I wrote for the National Endowment. Anyway, there was a 40-page paper that I had to write to satisfy the requirements of a grant.
Oh, been there.
You've been there, yeah. And I thought, oh God, why am I doing this? And then 40 years later, it's really the cookbook. It's
Everything old is new again.
Yeah.
And also, it never hurts to write things down. Those are two important lessons I think we can take away from this.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how your relationship with the instrument has changed, because you took a long sort of break away from, the Buchla or maybe more electronic, live performance. And then you came back to it only kind of quite recently. So, I mean, is it something where you're inventing new techniques now, or are you leaning on this paper that you wrote in the 70s?
It's a combination, because the machine, you have to meet it halfway. Mm-hmm. And this new instrument, the 200E, didn't have what I was used to. And so I got a couple of clones. So I have a clone Marf, the top left, that thing that I'm playing a lot. Mm-hmm. That doesn't exist in the 200. And that's another reason why I'm out playing, is that I want to, before I leave the planet, have some impact on the design mm-hmm. of the instruments, because you cannot do something unless you have the tool. So it's a collaborative process. And we need the tools, and then we need the technique.
I'm nodding hard because this is the kind of thing, like, again, in like computing history, this happens a lot, where there's, this privilege that's paid to the people that create the hardware, and the people that sort of create the software, activate the hardware through performance or use or whatever, often tend to sort of be marginalized and seen as less important. It's like this sort of distinction between front end and back end. But I think the relationship between, I guess in this case, the artist and the engineer is so vital. I mean, can determine the future of instruments development, but also, where the technology actually touches human life is where it really counts.
It's very collaborative.
Yeah. So, I mean, how would you sort of describe your ideal relationship between an artist and an engineer? I mean, I know you work closely with Buchla, but... Mm. Oh, wow. I did not expect that sound.
Right. Well, when I came back to this, Dawn and I moved back to the West Coast from New York City in '92. Mm-hmm. And Dawn and I reconnected, but mostly as friends. We played tennis. He was a good tennis player. And I would, come pick him up in Berkeley at his shop and see all these little machines. But I wasn't tempted. I absolutely had no intention. I was giving concerts with the piano and writing with the piano and sitting in my Oceanside studio with the piano, looking out over the sea and writing about birds and,
Yeah, the dream, basically.
Yeah, right. And then, a certain moment came where he said, if you're ever thinking of getting back into this, now is the time, because I'm going to sell the company. And I wasn't thinking about getting back into it. But I heard him and I thought, well, all right, let's do it. Let's get a little system. And so we put together a little system. He gave me a very good deal. And, I
heard a story about that.
Yeah, I traded my car. Yeah, right.
She traded an Audi for a Buchla.
Right. And the Audi, was my favorite machine. I loved it. And within a year of giving it to Buchla, it was covered with, oh God, mold. And it was just...
Maybe you just had that effect on technology, just instantly. Okay, yes. So the Buchla came back into your life.
Buchla came back into my life, and then when he died, I got this kind of booster stage where I said, and I found, I came out from under a rock. I had no idea what was going on. Mm-hmm. And these early albums had come out, the Buchla concerts, 1975, on Finders Keepers, and suddenly I became aware of this renaissance, and so I stepped into it.
With grace.
Yes, I hope.
I think it's fascinating to me, sort of reading about your life and reading interviews with you over the last couple of days, how many times you've kind of transformed yourself. And you've always been, from what I can tell from the outside, fiercely independent and prone to this kind of reinvention. You left classical composition behind to stake a life with the Buchla, and then you took that Buchla to New York and created a commercial agency that basically scored the 80s, from what I can tell. And then you left that behind to produce and record and release your own new age records. Where does that drive for transformation and reinvention come from in you?
It's organic. I never plan anything, and in fact, I always used to say, when I started the Buchla, I could hear myself say, I will never play the piano again. And then I came back to the piano. I said, oh, that's strange. I said I'd never do that again. And I said I'd never play the Buchla again. And then I was playing that. So now I know that I have no idea what's going to happen. And I'm as surprised as anybody at every turn that it's taken. But it just happens. I'm a follower, really.
A follower of your own muse, not a follower.
Yes, I'm a follower of my muse. My muse, I trust it. It's a little voice. I don't know if before I got back to this, I had gone in my traditional way. I'd gone to Venice in Italy, and I wrote an album. So I like to travel and get settled in an inspirational place and write. And I came home, and I was about to record that. And it never happened. And I always thought it was going to happen. I don't know if it'll ever happen. If I die, it's on my computer.
Okay, what's the file? What's the name of the file? What folder is it in? Just so we know for later. Yeah. Are you sitting on a lot of unreleased material that we don't know about?
Well, if you call archival stuff unreleased, Finders Keepers, I have vaults filled with tapes from the day, but I never thought of them as releasable. They're releasing commercials and weird stuff, So I have a lot of that.
Yeah, you never know what's going to come around and, be really interesting to people a little while down the road.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to talk about your commercial work, because I think it's, I know a lot of artists today who sort of try to balance the art and commerce as best they can in order to bankroll their lives and facilitate the creation of art. But it seems like you kind of just did it all at once. Like you were just, for 10 years, it seems, just making sound logos for Coke and Atari and doing movies. And, can you just tell us a little bit about that time? What motivated you to start doing that work? And why did you sort of check out from it?
Technology was super expensive then. Mm-hmm. When I hear kids complain about how expensive something costs, I just laugh. Really, because, I had one instrument, a synclavier, it was $200,000. And if you wanted to record, we didn't have home studios. You had to go rent a studio for thousands of dollars a day. So if you wanted to do something that was, and I've always wanted to be at the, forefront. I don't know why. If you're going to do something, you might as well do it, the best.
You're an early adopter, basically.
Yeah, I guess you'd say that. Yeah. Except for children. Yeah. I don't know. But anyway, so it was expensive. Mm-hmm. So the money, was the partner in the whole thing. You needed money. And the money, I was only interested in making the money vis-a-vis supporting the artistic career. And I did separate my time because commercials didn't happen on the weekend. So I could do commercial work all week, and then I could do my stuff on the weekend. And it was a beautiful space that opened up because the weekend was quiet and continuous and, you know.
So you still manage to do your own sort of your soul work on the weekends, even when you're making code. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into the commercial game? I've heard a story about how you got the Coke gig. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Well, the first one I did, I was still a student at UC Berkeley. And then actually that's what got me to LA. Because I was doing a commercial for MJB Coffee.
Okay.
Making the sound of coffee. And, percolating and all that, And they said, oh, let's record in LA. So I put the Buchla in my, sports car, of course.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was so cool. Top down, drove to LA. And I don't know what happened. I'm not sure how I got connected in LA, but I know that I met a lot of people. And I was the only girl in town with a Buchla. And that helped a lot.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
And you knew how to use it.
And I know how to use it, and I gave lessons to a lot of top film composers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were interested. The film world is very, they're always looking for something new, something inspiring. Technology is inspiring, right? Because it's different.
So you scored some films, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but in the 80s, you scored this Lily Tomlin movie, The Incredible Shrinking Woman, which is such a great, weird, wonderful movie.
I love that.
I know, it's incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about working on that film and working with Lily Tomlin?
Well, in retrospect, I had no idea at the time when they hired me to do that technically I was the first woman to be hired to do a Hollywood feature.
Wow.
Solo, whatever, however you want to quantify it. And then I found out years later that there wasn't another. I was reading the obituary of, I can't even remember, I'm so sorry, a woman composer in the Society of Composer and Lyricists, SCL. It's an LA kind of group. And she had done a film in 1994 and said she was the first. So between 1980 and 1994,
wow,
no woman was hired to score a Hollywood feature. I was totally ready, willing, and able. I was hired by women. Verna Fields had edited Jaws and was promoted to the head of production at Universal. That's how I got hired. Men aren't going to hire women. I mean, yes, there are a couple, but, when women get in positions, and then I never got another film. I was offered films by Verna, but I wanted a romance.
Like a romantic film?
Romantic film. Yeah, I wanted a romance.
Why?
Well, because as a gun for hire, I was doing commercials. And for films, I wanted to do my music. I wanted to do romantic music. I didn't want to do, even in Shrinking Woman, there was everything from New Orleans jazz to, R&B. I mean, my idea was to do something, like the piano. I wish they'd called me for that.
So you qualify your music as romantic music?
My other music is romantic, yeah.
That's a cool bumper sticker.
What did you say?
It's like a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
I get this series that we're sitting here and talking in part of is called Made in LA. And I didn't know until this afternoon that you had lived in Los Angeles. I assumed that you had just gone straight from San Francisco to New York. And I'd just love to know about, what your experience was in LA. I mean, you worked in some commercial work and film work, but, where did you live? What was it like? Did you like it?
Well, when I first got here, I lived in the Hollywood Hills.
Okay.
And, the things that I remember are just that there was a serial rapist in the neighborhood. called the Lone Ranger. So I was a little
Not
nervous.
starting on a good foot here.
I was a little nervous.
Okay.
So I moved to the beach. I drove out to Malibu one day in my sports car, and I found a little cottage, the first house outside of the colony. It had a tennis court. There was a big house, and I had the little cottage in the back, and that was perfect because I had the ocean, which is my deepest inspiration and always has been, right there. And it was a wonderful time. And I would just, the traffic wasn't as bad, but it was bad. So I would drive in, and I was very connected with the art world. I had a friend at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And so my existence was really kind of in the art world here. I knew a lot of painters. And then I worked with film people.
Yeah, I imagine living in Venice in the mid-'70s. It's like that's the glory days of the art world. And
Yes.
well, not the glory days, but that's a peak moment in LA art
It
history.
was, yeah, it was. Malibu was a tiny little village. There was nothing. There was no shopping center. There was a gas station, and then there was a little, cafe, and that was it.
So you've always liked living close to the ocean?
Yeah.
How does that influence, obviously you said it was your biggest inspiration too, and I noticed that there were some wave sounds, oceanic sounds in your set today. Is that something that you always try to incorporate?
Yeah, my first album was called Seven Waves, and it was really one continuous piece, kind of the songs come out of the waves, and the compositional form of the pieces was a wave. So, the architecture. So classical music had a certain form, and I do use that as well, but I like the energy of a wave that kind of grows and then it recedes. And I think of it as a very feminine form. Mm-hmm. The energy is slow.
Well, back to the synthesizer being an inherently feminist instrument, right?
Yes,
That's
exactly.
waves of go-go.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this new recording that they're selling in the hallway. Live Quadraphonic, which so uniquely comes with this sort of piece of decoder hardware so that you can adapt it to play quadrophonically in your own home. How did that project come about?
Well, I have to thank Cameron, who's
Shout out
here
Cameron.
someplace. This was his idea, actually. I hadn't yet come to terms with how to proliferate any of my current music. And it is essentially quadraphonic. And because we're reliving now the 70s in many ways, with this fascination with vinyl and cassettes and so forth, there were systems in the 70s for quadraphonic sound that were just there for, abandoned. The first time around that quad came in the record world, I had great hopes for it because I was a quad person. Mm-hmm. But the industry didn't know how to use it. There wasn't any music that was nascently, inherently quadraphonic. And so they said, well, let's see, we can market this. We'll say it's like a concert hall, and you put, the front stage in the front, and then you put the back of the hall in the back. Mm-hmm. And that was not very convincing as a useful, paradigm for this new thing. I tried to get my quad music, which I thought, I played at the AES show, and I wanted it to be used in that format, but it didn't. And anyway, the format failed, I think, for lack of content. Mm-hmm. And so now we're just using the same technology. Is that right, Kamran? Very close. He knows all about it. So I give him all the credit for producing that.
What are your hopes for the future of quadraphonic recording and performance?
Well, now we're in an era where speakers are proliferating. Mm-hmm. I just did a project for a group with, 52 speakers. I played with Myers, at Moog Fest. We had 40-something speakers. And So I think we're in an era now of spatial immersive sound. And all that's great. And you still need meaningful content. So I don't think there's a problem with the translation of quad up. You know, the project that I just did in Berlin, which was with the 52 speakers, I basically did my quad, and then, you know, we dealt with tiers of height and layers. So if you're moving the sound, you can also move it vertically.
Like cube instead of quad.
Yeah.
Cube.
Quab.
Carry on.
So you know, how many can you? When I play the Buchla, 4 is perfectly adequate for me to control, and plus I have multiple, spatial configurations that I'm dealing with. So I don't want to deal with more than quad, and it can translate into any number of speakers. So I think we're in an era now of really, I wish that it would transform the way theaters are built. That hasn't really happened yet.
Well, it seems like there's a real hunger for it on behalf of the audiences. I mean, speaking as like a sort of, I think I'm like the last millennial. Like the idea of going somewhere and having like a truly immersive experience that's not mediated by a bunch of other things is like, it's radical at this point to me. So, I mean, I don't know, I speak for my generation, but it seems to me like there's only going to be more and more demand and interest in these kinds of performances.
Yes, and you know, all these performances that we go to, that we've been going to for the last 40 years, it's absurd. You know, you go to a rock show and these guys fill an arena and they come in with 25 trucks of stuff. And it's like, why don't we have theaters, you know, where you can just have access to those options of stuff that you want? Yeah.
It's a good idea. We should find someone with a lot of money and make it happen.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
I'm going to go home tomorrow. I've been on tour for 3 weeks. I'm very tired and dirty.
You don't look dirty or tired.
Hair is, oh boy. And going to play some tennis. Then I'm going to, I've been doing classes at Berklee College of Music in Boston.
Cool.
So I go there. I'm a scholar of electronic music. I go in the fall and in the spring. And this spring, they've just merged with Boston Conservatory. And so we're doing a concerto for Buchla and orchestra.
Is it important to you to sort of pass on this incredibly specific knowledge to future generations?
Yes.
Okay, well, on the note of passing on knowledge, I think we should probably open it up to Q&A before the evening or afternoon ends.
My question is about the hand controllers that you're using. It's a techie question. I'm familiar with the Buchla somewhat, but I'm not familiar with the variety of controllers that you're using. Can you maybe go into that a little bit? Some of the ones that are sort of scattered around the table a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the system that I'm using now is very, very compact. When I started performing, I had a bigger system and it was too vulnerable to damage with the airlines. So I pared it down, and it's a very disciplined system. And I was working with an engineer for Moog, trying to get him to make a Buchla. And and he showed me the Animoog. And so one of my little iPads is the Animoog that I just love. I use that for that sustained bass. It's kind of like and some melodies that you'll see me playing on the iPad. The other iPad is a Bluetooth interface for the H9. The H9, which is an Eventide, processing. In the old days, we had a voltage-controlled reverb. So spatially, in terms of designing immersive spaces, you could make a sound close or far away and move it, and it was great. And we don't have that now. So I missed that, and I had that H9 modified so that I can voltage control the mix of the process signal and the direct signal. So it's kind of a, a rough way of getting the old spatial control of reverb. Other than that, I'm using the Buchla keyboard that you see on the left with the hand shape like that. Do you know that keyboard? Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And that's it for the touching. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, how about you over here in the black t-shirt? Perfect.
Could you talk more about the how you're thinking about the spatialization patterns live and how you're controlling that live?
Okay. I have, say, 3 options. So one of them is continuous. And with continuous, it means that it's not, it's when I start out with the waves, for instance, it's a slow move around the room. When the rhythm comes in, I can use the pulses of the rhythm to drive the control voltage to make a discrete pattern. And this is effective for rhythm. So the sound moves in the rhythm of the music. I like to move it. I have 2 ways of moving it discretely. One is random. So I have a random voltage controller where I put a pulse in from the sequencer, and then I get a random voltage. I use that a lot for different, operations. So I use the random voltage discrete for discrete placement of the rhythmic part. And then I have a separate system, which is a sequencer just dedicated to the control voltage control for a second set of spatial. And that is mostly discrete, but I also have a knob that I can make it continuous. Let's see. And then the other thing is using the voltage control. The other thing that's easy is the swirl. So the 227 comes with a swirl button. And you just hit that button, it lights up green, and everything swirls around. I have a control voltage in there, and I don't have enough hands to move that. So my swirl is always like speeding up and slowing down. And then the other thing for spatial control is what I was just talking about with the processing to make it in and out, far and near. We have a lot of work to do on that. Does that make sense? Did you hear that? Different space? Yeah. The good thing about the discrete and the continuous, there's a problem with speakers is that if you're sitting close to one and it's making a sound, it will mask the other speakers. So you don't get, you can't get the experience. But if you're discrete, if the sound is discretely in a speaker, then you do experience, no matter where you're sitting, because your speaker is not masking. There's no masking because there's only one speaker at a time. So there are tricks to having the experience be more, felt not only from the optimum position, right there. Yeah.
I bet you're a great teacher.
You know what?
Yeah. I think you are. Yes. You right there. I don't know. I'm just calling him out. You can call him out too if you want.
Can you describe your process or the relationship of how you compose and your timbre selection and that creative process? You had mentioned waves earlier, but I wonder, are you inventing a sound and then writing around that? Or do you write something and then invent the sound?
Well, for me, honestly, maybe because I play the Buchla, the sound is a byproduct of everything else I do. I don't think about the sound. I think about the way the sound moves. So this idea of it being a sound came out of the use of conventional keyboards. When a synth was suddenly coupled with a black and white keyboard and people could just hit a key and get a sound, they thought it was about the sound. And so they'd say, oh, listen to that sound, and now I have that sound. And then they started sampling sounds. And, you know, in the life of this, in the realm of this type of instrument, a sample sound is dead. It's just dead. It has no life because it's not being invented in the moment. There's a lot going on in this. There's a lot of energy created by the control voltages. It's not just you doing one action and producing a result. You've got a lot of energies going on. And so the thing is constantly morphing and alive. And also Dawn, you know, is very good at gates. You know, the low pass gate, there are 3 positions on the gate, and it dramatically changes the sound. So that's something that I do deal with, is like which position. And then the filters. But I'm not that sound oriented, and I do get some good sounds just because it's a Buchla. Can't help it.
Hi there. So an instrument like this is radically different from, you know, what you like a piano, for example, which is very harmonically based. But what is your approach towards harmonic content in music, or when you're using the Buchla?
Well, it's mostly dealing with filters. You know, a filter is a wonderful way to sweep through the harmonic content of a sound. And so, you know, that's a beautiful thing to do. Sometimes, you know, I used to do pieces that were durational, where the sound just slowly swept through the overtones. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, the Coca-Cola bubbles were overtones. You know, I took a sub-harmonic sound and just picked off picked off the harmonics with a filter. So harmonics are, you know, beautiful, integrated aspects of the sound. Yeah, it's not a piano. It doesn't have a sustain, but it does have a lot of access to harmonics, mostly on an individual basis, maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, my intention with the question was more along the lines of something like chord progressions or melodic content, which is, I think, what I was going for when I mentioned harmonic content.
Okay, well...
Like, how do you approach something like that, if
okay.
at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think of this as a contrapuntal instrument because I'm not using a keyboard, and it's not chords. I have no more than 2 notes at any time. So I have 4 sequences, and there are 4 16-stage sequences that work vertically and horizontally and obliquely or whatever. You know, they're designed to work. And so I don't think of it as chords.
Oh, we got a question all the way over here, if the mics can move that fast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and performing for us today. Similar to the timbres question, but a little bit different, I think. When you're approaching the instrument to play as you did earlier today, are you thinking in terms of moving through a series of techniques with the instrument that result in different environments? Are you actively imagining different moods that you're trying to create for the audience, or something else entirely?
Well, technique is definitely part of the whole thing. I mean, it's really handy, to have. It's like anything. If you're playing the piano, and you have, chords and arpeggios and, whatever, there are techniques that are kind of married to the instrument or that are integral to the instrument, and I do use those in a variety of ways. I guess you can't separate the techniques from what you can do with this instrument. I mean, it can all be defined as technique at a certain point. So I use a lot of random waveform modulation to give a rhythmic pulse. You want variety. I mean, it's static in a way because the four sequences are really just plowing ahead, and you're trying to find ways of varying them so that they don't drive you crazy. And those are techniques to do that. In the old days, I wasn't as bound. This sequencer is very compact, and so it's digital. I have no access to it when I'm playing. It's menu driven. So it's a given and it's set. In the old one, I could go in and change the pulses, change the length, change the, I could retune it. I could do all kinds of things that I can't do with this one. So, you're always working within the limitations of what your components can do, and you maximize that. It's what you do and what it does. What can the instrument do and what can you do? I like pitch. So I was very perturbed when I came to this instrument. After the 200, it would not tune. That was before I got the clone of the Marf. So the 250 was the modern Marf, called a Darf. And I couldn't do my music. And Don said, I said, I can't tune this. And he said, well, come on over. I'll show you how to tune it, So I got over there. And he said, you're right. Can't tune. I said, well, I'm looking at the inventor like, are you going to save me? Are you going to fix this? Are you going to do something that will give me what I need? Like the old days, And I said, yeah. So what can we do? And he says, do something else.
Wise words in a way. Okay, I'm told that was the last question, and I don't want you to give away all of your secrets, so I think we should call it. But thank you so much to Suzanne Ciani for being here. What a treat.